Ladies and gentlemen, I have been telling you, and hit subscribe to this channel right now. I have been telling you that people who committed crimes, Comey, Brennan, a whole bunch of others, including Madam Secretary, Letitia James for potential mortgage fraud, if they circumvent, just recently, like the case was dismissed, and hit subscribe to this channel right now, certain indictments were dismissed. President Trump has a year before November of 26, when Democrats likely take the House, but actually that doesn't really matter at all. Within the next year, 2 years, probably 3 years, until 28, he's going to indict at least 30 plus people. I've been telling you this because there are likely 30 people who committed major crimes, felonies, serious felonies, in setting up and framing Trump and covering up other scandals. So basically covering up Democratic Party scandals and going against Trump and fabricating, the most absurd allegations. He worked with the Kremlin to defeat Clinton. There was not a shred of evidence. We can go on forever. The Mar-a-Lago raid was not only unethical, but illegal. Hit subscribe to this channel. I mean, we can go on forever, but James Comey almost certainly lied under oath numerous times. You're going to watch right now the beginning of the lies with Senator Susan Collins. We know that he lied because declassified information from the Director of National Intelligence, from the Durham Probe Annex. This is what the current Central Intelligence Agency chief, John Ratcliffe, pointed to when he alluded to Comey and others being indicted. The Durham Probe Annex proves, or at least gives enough evidence to indict a number of people, including the Honorable James Comey. Hit subscribe to this channel. Check this out. This is, by the way, really quickly, CNN Justice Department could present a new indictment against James Comey to a grand jury this week. They're going to continue to indict Comey because almost certainly he committed serious felonies. Lying under oath, perjury, conspiracy, setting up and framing Trump with a dossier Clinton purchased. You can't do that. For anyone who disagrees, let's say you are, a high-powered attorney. What if President Trump and Rudy Giuliani purchased a dossier and Kash Patel investigated Kamala Harris? Or anyone, Newsom, anyone, AOC, utilizing a dossier that was purchased by Rudy Giuliani and President Trump. Would that be legal? Of course it wouldn't be legal. Of course it would be not only unethical, but but the definition of criminality. Anyway, hit subscribe. Check it out. Check this out. This is the beginning of all the lies. When he wrote the Comey memos, he began endless, like a web of deceit and almost certain criminal activity, leaking information. This is very important. Check this out.
I want first to ask you about your conversations with the president, the 3 conversations in which you told him that he was not under investigation. The first was during your January 6th meeting, according to your testimony, in which it appears that you actually volunteered that assurance. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you limit that statement to counterintelligence investigations, or were you talking about any kind of FBI investigation?
I didn't use the term counterintelligence. I was speaking to him and briefing him about some salacious and unverified material. It was in the context of that.
Why would the FBI director introduce salacious and unverified material to an incoming president? That is illegal. That is the basis of the conspiracy charges that will be leveled against Comey. Why would he admit to that? How could anyone, even if you dislike Trump, how could you allow that to happen in the United States of America?
That he had a strong and defensive reaction about that not being true. And my reading of it was important for me to assure him we were not personally investigating him. And So the context then was actually narrower.
That was yet another lie. That was maybe the beginning of the lies. Of course, they were personally investigating Trump. He was the subject of a criminal probe that he hid, that Comey and others and McCabe hid from General Michael Flynn to set him up and frame him. Carter Page, George Papadopoulos. It was a criminal probe that centered around President Trump and everyone around President Trump. So that's the first lie.
Focused on what I just talked to him about. That was very important because it was first true, and second, I was worried very much about being in kind of a J. Edgar Hoover type situation. I didn't want him thinking that I was briefing him on this to sort of hang it over him in some way. I was briefing him.
That is exactly why he briefed President Trump, incoming President Trump, on a dossier literally purchased by Clinton, and Comey almost certainly knew that. He had to have known that. Why would he introduce a dossier to an incoming president without knowing the origin of the dossier?
On it because we had been told by the media it was about to launch. We don't want to be keeping that from him, and if there was he needed to know this was being said.
We were told by the media. He was actively influencing the media narrative by leaking information, not just Comey, a whole bunch of people.
But I was very keen not to leave him with an impression that the Bureau was trying to do something to him. And so that's the context in which I said, sir, we're not personally investigating you.
And then and that's why you volunteered the information.
Yes, ma'am.
Correct. Then on the January 20th.
Don't you love Senator Collins? You volunteered the information. It was well, that was very nice of you. You volunteered. Yes, wonderful, Senator Collins. He volunteered a dossier literally purchased by Hillary Clinton and the DNC. And they paid a Federal Election Commission fine. But anyway, let's continue. To literally set up and frame an incoming president. That's why, look, like those people like Jimmy Kimmel was talking about how, he's not friends with, there's Hollywood celebrities, there's a lot of people disown family members and friends who are supporters of President Trump. They don't know any of this. And when they know, they don't care. And if you explain to them, hey, what if the tables were turned? And Kash Patel was utilizing a dossier Rudy Giuliani and President Trump purchased against Harris or AOC. And then they accused AOC of being in a Moscow hotel room from a dossier purchased by Rudy Giuliani. They wouldn't understand, like, when you flip the script and when the tables are turned and when the shoe is on the other foot, they don't see things that way. It's impossible for them to see things that way. Because when you've been indoctrinated to believe that Trump is the most, evil person that's ever existed, anything goes. So you couldn't if Trump had treated them in the manner they treated him, they would never stand for it.
The seventh dinner, you told the president that he should be careful about asking you to investigate because, quote, you might create a narrative.
Jeff, thank you for watching in the Philippines. Thanks everybody for watching from around the world. Thank you.
That we were investigating him personally, which we weren't. Again, were you limiting that statement to counterintelligence investigations or more broadly, such as a criminal investigation?
The context was very similar. I didn't modify the word investigation. It was, again, he was reacting strongly again to that unverified material, saying, I'm tempted to order you to investigate it. And that, in the context of that, I said, sir, you want to be careful about that because it might create a narrative we're investigating you personally.
That's so bizarre. That's so bizarre. I mean, what an overt lie or such deception in that statement. President Trump rightfully says this is a lie. I have no clue what this is about. These are absurd allegations. I want you to investigate that. And then Comey says, be careful. You wouldn't want to make it seem that we're investigating you. It's like, that was the entire Crossfire Hurricane. He was lying. That's literally a lie. That's a literal lie. Crossfire Hurricane was a criminal probe of Trump. And he was the subject of the criminal probe. And they can say, oh, that's not technically true. The entire Crossfire Hurricane investigation led to the Mueller probe. Both of these absurd, nonsensical, futile investigations were predicated on the absurd conspiracy theory that Trump was working with the Kremlin to undermine Clinton's campaign when Politico and her own emails state they wanted to elevate Trump. Clinton's team literally stated in their own writing that they wanted Trump to win the GOP nomination. It's unbelievable. And then it's like, not only did the Russians want Trump, apparently the Clinton team wanted Trump until Trump won. Then there was that ongoing criminal probe, Crossfire Hurricane. Then Trump becomes an incoming president. Then Comey introduces the Steele dossier to Trump. And then the lie here is that he told Trump, well, be careful. You might make it seem like we're investigating you. Which, of course, they were investigating. They were spying on his campaign from day one.
And then there was the March 30th phone call with the president in which you reminded him that congressional leaders have been briefed that we were not personally, the FBI was not personally investigating President Trump. And again, was that statement to congressional leaders and to the president limited to counterintelligence investigations, or was it a broader statement? I'm trying to understand whether there was any kind of investigation of the president underway.
No, I'm sorry. And if I misunderstood, I apologize. We briefed the congressional leadership about.
So this man was one of the most powerful people. He's one of the most powerful individuals in American history. Okay? James Comey is one of the most powerful individuals in American history. He also is one of the greatest liars, possibly one of the greatest liars, possibly, potentially, in American history. So is Brennan. Brennan is one of the most powerful people, and he was also one of the greatest liars. Everyone knows. It's not my opinion. This isn't conjecture. This isn't hyperbole. They lied endlessly. We know that from the declassified documents, and we don't even have all the declassified documents. I read a whole bunch of very, all of these national security publications and websites and legal scholars, and all of them are defending Comey. All of them know he lied. Okay, they know that Trump never worked with Russia. They just wanted a pretext. The whole thing was a pretext to ruin Trump's presidency. If the tables were turned and Comey had memos of a conversation with President Obama, and there was a dossier that said President Obama was in Moscow, and it was purchased by Rudy Giuliani and Trump, which is exactly what took place against Trump. You had the DNC and Hillary Clinton purchase a dossier and Comey begin a criminal probe based on a dossier. Imagine if Kash Patel, the equivalent, Kash Patel, President Trump, investigated President Obama with a dossier purchased by the Republican National Committee. This is like the exact opposite. The tables turned, the shoe's on the other foot, the script is flipped. They would never stand for that. It would never happen. I mean, the New York Times and the Washington Post would get Pulitzer Prizes, eviscerating the absurd President Obama Russia hoax. But that's not what took place. They went after Trump in the most deceitful manner. But let's continue. Okay, all of this is complete nonsense. What he's saying is complete nonsense. But we know this from the declassified documents. And I'm not saying it's complete nonsense. John Ratcliffe, the CIA chief, the current CIA chief, states that, all of the Durham probe and everything else they have points to a massive conspiracy of individuals to set up and frame Trump, an incoming president. And we still haven't come to terms with 2016. And by the way, thank you, Paul Bartlett in Australia. Thank you so much for your support always. Thank you.
what Americans we had opened counterintelligence investigation cases on, and we specifically said the president is not one of those Americans, but that there was no other investigation of the president that we were not mentioning at that time. What the context was.
That is a lie under oath. They didn't explain everything that was going on with all the different ways they tried to surveil Trump.
Counterintelligence, but I wasn't trying to hide some criminal investigation of the president.
And was the president under investigation at the time of your dismissal on May 9th?
No.
But he was. It was a criminal probe. Crossfire Hurricane was a criminal probe. Crossfire Hurricane was a criminal probe of President Trump's administration, where if they had found information on Trump, he would have been, obviously criminally charged. It wasn't, they went after George Papadopoulos and General Michael Flynn and Carter Page, not because these individuals were running for president. They went after these innocent Americans, these patriots, because they were around President Trump. They were working with President Trump. National Security Advisor Michael Flynn was set up and framed by McCabe, where even Comey said General Flynn didn't lie, or it's reported that Comey told the truth for a second. But Crossfire Hurricane was a criminal probe, and it centered around President Trump's campaign. That's a lie. Of course he was under criminal investigation, for no reason, by the way. For no reason, because there was no evidence that Russia interfered. They did nothing to interfere. Okay, when Democrats say Russia interfered, how? The emails that were released were literally emails they wrote. It was their emails. So the mentality is their writing showed so much corruption that people would move to Trump because they said they would, once they read that Bernie Sanders was cheated and the Clintons were taking advantage of the foundation, all of that they would move to Trump because there was such rampant criminality among the Democratic Party. That's the mentality. The Russians are so devious that they created this nefarious plot to inform America of how corrupt Democrats are, thus influencing people to vote Trump.
I'd like to now turn to the conversations with the president about Michael Flynn, which have been discussed at great length. And first, let me make very clear that the president never should have cleared the room, and he never should have asked you, as you reported, to let it go.
Oh, really? The commander-in-chief has no right to tell his own FBI chief to let an investigation go of his national security advisor that did nothing wrong? Really? Really? Imagine if President Bush or President Obama had an FBI chief that wrote memos about private conversations regarding an investigation that was literally set up to frame Trump or to frame the incoming president. That's interesting.
To let the investigation go. But I remain puzzled by your response. Your response was, I agree that Michael Flynn is a good guy. You could have said, Mr. President, this meeting is inappropriate. This response could compromise the investigation. You should not be making such a request. It's fundamental to the operation of our government that the FBI be insulated from this kind of political pressure.
Who believes this nonsense? When President Trump became president in 2016, it was like shattering all of the illusions and it was like shattering this facade where they had to then recreate these illusions. Don't you know that these conversations with the president who asked you? I mean, how dare the commander-in-chief ask his own FBI chief, who, by the way, is within the executive branch and works for the commander-in-chief under the Constitution. How dare the president actually state, stop this investigation? So what? There was nothing that Michael Flynn did that was criminal at all. Nothing. Zero. The only thing that they charged people on was allegedly lying to FBI agents. That's it. No conspiracy with the Ruskies.
And you've talked a bit today about that you were stunned by the president making the request. But my question to you is,
and by the way, allegedly lying to FBI agents who literally covered up the Clinton email probe. Nobody knows how top secret intelligence was transferred onto Clinton's servers. Comey, McCabe, Strzok, none of them explained. It is impossible from a cybersecurity perspective, but nobody cares.
later on, upon reflection, did you go to anyone at the Department of Justice and ask them to call the White House counsel's office and explain that the president had to have a far better understanding and appreciation of his role vis-a-vis the FBI?
In general, I did. I spoke to the Attorney General and I spoke to the new Deputy Attorney General, Mr. Rosenstein, when he took office and explained my serious concern about the way in which the president is interacting, especially with the FBI. And I specifically, as I said in my testimony, told the Attorney General, it can't happen that you get kicked out of the room and the president talks to me. But look, in the room, but why didn't we raise the specific? It was of investigative interest to us to try and figure out, so what just happened with the president's request? So I would not have wanted to alert the White House that it had happened until we figured out what are we going to do with this investigatively.
He didn't want to alert the White House because they were setting up and framing General Flynn. That's why. I mean, this is hilarious. I mean, it's nefarious. It's not it's amusing. The overt lies are amusing because in hindsight, you look back and all of this almost certain criminal activity was taking place. They set up and framed Trump. Even, look, there are larger channels than my own, and they know that too. Democratic pundits, CNN, MSNBC, the Washington Post, New York Times, The Atlantic, you don't think they understand Trump was set up and framed? They all know. But it's like a catch me if you can mentality. They're going to try to get away with as much of this type of dirty politics as possible. And then they're going to try to obfuscate and defend the indefensible as much as possible. That's why 50 intelligence officials lied about Hunter's laptop. They know that was wrong. They don't care. They still, okay, the Steele dossier, 90% of wonderful, morally superior liberal Democrats who despise Trump have no clue. They don't know what it is. It would be like explaining quantum physics to a house cat. They have no clue what it is. They don't care. They don't know. They just know Trump is mean and he's bad. And they were told he was bad by CNN and the Washington Post and MSNBC and the New York Times and Jimmy Kimmel for 10 years. They don't know what the Steele dossier is. They don't know what Comey Memo is. They don't know that top secret intel and SAP intel were on Clinton's servers. They don't care. This is like, if you watch this channel, you do understand. We look at the Director of National Intelligence declassified documents. We look at Chuck Grassley's Durham probe annex. Most Americans don't care, have no clue. And people who despise Trump have even less of a clue. They don't know. They don't know. Nor do they care. They just don't care.
Your testimony was that you went to Attorney General Sessions and said, don't ever leave me alone with him again. Are you saying that you also told him that he had made...
You imagine the FBI director telling the Attorney General, don't ever leave me alone with this president again. What is this? This is the most hilarious soap opera that they created because Trump won. They never treated President Trump as a president. They never viewed Donald Trump as an actual president. He was like a foreigner, like this alien, this Martian, this orange menace that happened to... The retribution started during President Obama's last months in office. When they say like Trump is retribution toward, no, people committed crimes because they could not stand that an orange wrecking ball was, I mean, he was completely transforming. He was breaking the paradigm of, the Bush-Obama paradigm of politics. He was They knew that President Trump would tear it apart. And they didn't want Trump there. So they investigated Trump. Then Biden won. We had to suffer through 4 years of that. And then President Trump won again. And they never imagined him winning again.
Made a request that you let it go with regard to part of the investigation of Michael Flynn?
No, I specifically did not. I did not.
You mentioned that from your very first meeting with the president, you decided to write a memo memorializing the conversation. What was it about that very first meeting?
Could you imagine if anyone wrote a memo memorializing a meeting with Obama or Biden? The Atlantic immediately would call it treasonous. So would CNN and the Washington Post and MSNBC and the New York Times. The investigative journalists would find out if there was any crime committed. Oh my God, it would be Jimmy Kimmel and late night would go out. Saturday Night Live would do skits about it. It would be a catastrophe. It would be, they would call it treasonous. You're leaking a memo of a private conversation between President Obama and his own, this is a Republican. I mean, they would never allow that. Could you imagine all of these people defending Comey and Brennan? If Kash Patel, let's say Kash Patel was the FBI director during Biden's administration, and he has a private meeting with Biden where he can kind of sort of make out what Biden says. Hey, man, cornflakes, man. And he leaks memos. Biden talked about the graft in the Hunter laptop. Yeah. Oh my God, it would be the end of the world. How dare you? This is politicized. But when Comey did it, it was, oh, Trump. It's Trump again. Hey, Trump. Comey. Thank you, James Comey, for writing those amazing memos. I mean, could you imagine if the tables were turned? It's unheard of. It's unheard of. It would be the equivalent of a person working at a corporation and then leaking a private discussion with a CEO to the media.
That made you write a memo when you had not done that with two previous presidents.
As I said,
He had to think there. He's like, well, how am I going to lie this in?
combination of things. A gut feeling is an important overlay on but the circumstances that I was alone, the subject matter, and the nature of the person that I was interacting with, and my read of that person. And really just a gut feel laying on top of all of that, it's going to be important to protect.
Oh, so you wrote letters, you wrote memos memorializing a private conversation with the United States, with the president, the commander-in-chief of the United States of America, the incoming president, because of a gut feeling. Okay, sounds reasonable. I mean, if the tables were turned again and he did that with President Obama, oh my God, there would be no book deal, no MSNBC appearances, nothing.
This organization that I make records of this.
And finally, did you show copies of your memos?
And here's where he admits criminal liability.
To anyone outside of the Department of Justice?
Yes.
And to whom did you show copies?
I asked, President tweeted on Friday after I got fired that I better hope there's not tapes. I woke up in the middle of the night on Monday night, because it didn't dawn on me originally, that there might be corroboration for our conversation. There might be a tape. And my judgment was I needed to get that out into the public square. And so I asked a friend of mine to share the content of the memo with a reporter. Didn't do it myself for a variety of reasons, but I asked him to because I thought that might prompt the appointment of a special counsel. And so I asked a close friend of mine to do it.
And was that Mr. Wittes?
No.
Who was that?
A good friend of mine who's a professor at Columbia Law School.
Thank you.
So this is obviously just completely absurd. Letitia James is also going to be indicted again, according to reports. And Justice Department, okay, so preparing indictments against Comey and Letitia James. This is almost certainly why. Okay, so again, the Justice Department, the FBI, CIA, the ODNI, all of the intel agencies, the apparatus that Democrats worshipped, that media admired, and practically worshipped for 10 years, is now firmly in the control of President Trump. So when they went after Trump using the DOJ, FBI, CIA, it's the rule of law. It's the rule of law, don't you know? But then when Trump utilizes it because people actually committed crimes, it's, oh my God, a retribution tour. And then they sound exactly like President Trump, who had a point, who was right in stating, yeah, he was being set up and framed. But the people setting up and framing Trump actually committed crimes. So again, you can't try to convict innocent people, which is what Democrats tried to do. That is not the rule of law. That's a crime. That's what Letitia James tried to do, and Comey and others against Trump. But let's continue.
It's important that attorneys general representing our respective states stand up and enforce the rule of law, the President of these United States.
It's always the rule of law when they go after Trump, and it's a retribution tour when he finds that they committed crimes going after him. Okay? They had to make up crimes with Trump. Hush money, 34 counts. Like, no, it wasn't even an election crime. It'll be overturned by the Supreme Court. Okay? The hush money conviction, I have consistently told you, I'm like 90% correct on these predictions. I have consistently told you the Supreme Court will side with Trump. And now the Supreme Court has sided, I did an upload today, 94% of the time, 93+% of the time with President Trump. And this too, like the hush money conviction will be overturned, which will be absolutely fantastic. I'm telling you, heard that here first.
Is not above the law.
No matter how rich, powerful, or politically connected you are, everyone must play by the same rules.
Please sue him for us.
Oh, we're going to definitely sue him. We're going to be a real pain in the
Could you imagine if somebody was said, please sue a Democratic politician, please sue AOC for us? Imagine. God forbid. Heaven forbid. Could you imagine what media would say?
And now the Trump Justice Department may be a pain in her you-know-what. The Angle has obtained shocking allegations leveled by the Trump administration against New York Attorney General Letitia James. The Federal Housing Finance Agency has sent a criminal referral to the DOJ accusing James of mortgage fraud. In a letter to Attorney General Pam Bondi, Director Bill Pulte says James appears to have falsified records in order to meet certain lending requirements and receive favorable loan terms. He cited a property in Virginia that she's allegedly claimed as her principal residence and a property in New York that she claimed as a 4-unit structure instead of the required, instead of a 5, which Pulte says means she was able to get.
When it comes to ED,
and more favorable loan. Joining me now is Jonathan Turley, Fox News contributor and law professor at GW University. Jonathan, mortgage fraud is rampant in the United States. There's all sorts of fraud that's rampant. There's disability fraud that they've vowed to crack down on in the Trump administration. But this is another thing that they have vowed to crack down on because it costs real money. Your reaction to these allegations?
Well, obviously, the irony is perfectly crushing. This is a person who prosecuted Trump for everything short of ripping a label off a mattress. And among the charges that were brought in New York, in not just the civil but the criminal case, was making false or misleading statements to financial institutions. And one of these sections, Section 1014 of the federal code, is prosecuted. It took me about 60 seconds of a search to find cases that the Department of Justice brought against people who falsely claimed that property was their principal residence in order to get loans. So this is well-tread areas for the Justice Department. As for James, if we apply the Letitia James standard that she created, there'd be little question here. This seems pretty straightforward. What the administration is saying is this was not her principal residence. In fact, as a New York elected official, she had to say that her principal residence was in New York. This was an out-of-state residence. But also, they claim that in some of these forms, she actually states that her father is her husband in order to file as a married couple. So there's a lot of those questions. And as you know, the Supreme Court just stated earlier in March in a case called Thompson that they want to see knowing false statements under sections like 1014, not just misleading statements. These are misleading statements. Either it's your principal residence or it's not.
Or it's not.
Either you're married to your father or he's your father. So
again, they went after President Trump. Like when people say, "Oh, this is retribution," they went after Trump for legal technicalities that have never been utilized in a court of law. Like, nobody was ever convicted for FEC crimes by a state when the DOJ dropped the case. The FEC dropped the case. So how on earth could Trump have been convicted in New York? Okay, people have been convicted for mortgage fraud. It's not difficult to prove. Okay, it's paperwork. And if you're the attorney general, you understand the law. So when you lie on the paperwork, it's pretty clear that you're lying. It's not like Letitia James doesn't know the law. She's literally the attorney general of New York. Let's continue.
So they can this can satisfy the Thompson standard.
Yeah, well, Jonathan, we reached out to the DOJ, and they have no comment on this referral. We also reached out to Attorney General James, who did not respond to us either. So, again, everyone wants the best interest rate you can get. I understand that. But, she's a lawyer. She knows that when you sign a mortgage application, that mortgage application, if you're borrowing money, if you're not borrowing money, nobody cares whether it's your principal residence, except, where you file your taxes. But she decided to state that that was her principal residence, knowing it was not her principal residence. I didn't even know she had property. I mean, I guess she had property in Virginia and she has rental or investment property in New York. That's fine. But in the New York matter, to get the favorable rate, the building could only have 4 units. But it looks like the entirety of this building, it had 5 units, meaning it was in violation of the actual loan agreement. And again, this is not a novel application of the law, Jonathan, as you stated during the...
With Trump, they went after him in the most vicious, petulant manner. Okay, well, I guess we have to indict him. He tried to foment a rebellion. Don't you know? All those people who committed crimes on January, it was from President Trump. Trump's words. He's a diabolical madman. Okay, all of the indictments read like an MSNBC producer wrote them. Go read the indictments when you're bored. With Trump, the January indictments, all of those. It's like written as if, like, no benefit of the doubt. Written as if like a CNN or MSNBC or producer or the Democratic National Committee wrote them. Okay, that's why the Colorado State Supreme Court was overturned unanimously by the U.S. Supreme Court. Why do you think Democrats continually lose in the Supreme Court against Trump? Because they're always on the side. They're always engaged in unconstitutional behavior, and Trump is always on the side of the Constitution. That's not hyperbole. Go check the record. In 2020, when Trump lost like 90% of the cases in court, oh my God, they were giddy. Oh, Trump losing all the time. I guess Biden won fair and square. See, it's like, well, those judges wanted immediate evidence of wrongdoing and foul play, which you weren't going to get without a serious criminal probe in all of those states. And you're never going to find that evidence. Okay, when you have We can go on forever, okay? Democrats themselves didn't want Biden for re-election, okay? So they kicked Biden out of contention. The same person who less than 4 years earlier won more support than any other president, more votes than any other president ever. You think Joe Biden was more popular than Barack Obama? Of course not. Of course not. Yet he won more votes. So none of it makes sense. Okay. Even if he was like, what was the first Star Trek? It was just like a head on a computer. It was not Captain Kirk. Before Captain Kirk, who was the first captain? Okay, I forgot the guy's name, but it was like eventually it just became a head on a computer. If you just had that as president, if Biden was just like you couldn't understand him or whatever, he would if he actually had that political support in 2020, Clooney would never have written that op-ed because the support would have been legitimate and genuine. You don't lose all of that political capital and clout in less than 4 years if it's genuine. That's the point. They had a primary that they had him win, Biden, and then they kicked him out because that support really never existed to begin with. Anyway, let's continue.
Persecution of Donald Trump. She was using all these novel applications of law to go after him. This isn't novel. This is a black and white issue. You either did or you didn't.
Right, and this has been prosecuted.
Exactly. Nitty Kitty, thank you. Battle, thank you.
In the past. Now, we have not heard her side of this, but these documents themselves are quite damning. It's hard to see how the residences listed were her principal residence. The business about her father is just bizarre. Now, I'll note that one of the things that Letitia James stressed in her case against Trump is that Trump had to review documents that were filed in his name. And so she dismissed the argument that this was something that Trump's people put together. She said he's ultimately responsible. So they allege that she gave a power of attorney in a couple of these instances, but according to her own standard, that's not enough.
Well, Professor, the referral cites the case against the former Baltimore City prosecutor, Marilyn Mosby, because she was sentenced to a year in home confinement for lying about her finances to make early withdrawals from retirement funds during COVID, and then fraudulently claimed that her own $5,000 was a gift from her then husband as she closed on a Florida condo. So the idea that again, this is just no one ever goes after politicians for these types of, which may seem like small amounts, and they add up.
They do, and this is really for James, the very case that she most famously brought. She insisted that these technicalities matter and that the powerful should not be given a free pass. Well, that bill has come due in this case. She's going to have to deal with this filing. I'm honestly just not sure how you defend against this unless you say that these are fraudulent documents.
Jonathan, I have to raise this because the Democrats, when this really starts to blow up, which it should after the show, they're going to say, look, see, this is a revenge presidency. They're weaponizing the DOJ against Democrats, so it's a tit for tat.
But retribution and revenge for what? So when Democrats say it's revenge for, why? Because Trump actually committed crimes, and yet the Supreme Court sided with Trump and all of these things. Like, the Stormy thing with the hush money, that wasn't a crime. If anyone committed a crime, it's the people who signed the confidentiality agreement that didn't live up to it. Okay. Like, yet again, Trump is like, it's amazing. They went after Trump for 10 years, and all they have is a hush money conviction that will be overturned by the Supreme Court.
Do you see that as a potential vulnerability here?
Well, we are certainly living in that age, but the fact is James herself rejected that argument made when she brought, in my view, a ludicrous case in New York. That case was something that ultimately resulted in a grotesque ruling. By the way, the timing here is not.
Oh, and the $500 million, that was thrown out on appeals because they inflated. Like, it's like you have these AI robots, these like clapping seals. Trump inflated his net worth. Trump inflated his net worth. They'll just go ahead and say anything. Yes, the billionaire, the president billionaire inflated his net worth. Yes, Deutsche Bank wouldn't want to do a business with a billionaire president, literally part of world and U.S. history. Oh, but he inflated his net worth. It's like, what are you talking about? Even Deutsche Bank was literally part of the defense for Trump.
Not good. We're waiting for the appellate decision to come down. It's been a very long time. Each day we're looking.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it's happening. Like I said it would. Hit subscribe. Go to H.A. Goodman's other channel. To my super chat, thank you so much. Paul Bartlett, everybody here, thank you. I'll see you tomorrow, everybody. Hit subscribe to this channel. And